Okay, so you know that horrible plane and helicopter crash we talked about near Reagan National Airport back on January 29th in D.C.?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're going to kind of deep dive into the aftermath of that,
Right.
but not like the facts of the crash itself.
Okay.
More like the blame game that just exploded before the dust even settled.
Yeah.
You know, that whole whose fault is it frenzy,
Mm.
which social media just loves.
It's fascinating how quickly people jump to conclusions.
Oh, totally.
Especially, with a high-profile event like this.
Right, 67 lives lost.
Yeah, with 67 lives lost.
It's awful.
We just have this need to find a cause,
Right.
to find a person to blame. But that urge can really overshadow how complex these situations are.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that play out in this factcheck.org article
Okay.
that came out January 31st, so literally just 2 days after the crash.
Wow.
It breaks down some of the accusations that were already flying around
Oh, yeah.
from both sides of the political spectrum.
That's where critical thinking becomes so important.
Right.
We need to look at the evidence.
Or lack of it.
Yeah, or the lack of it, before we just jump on a bandwagon.
Exactly.
And that's what this factcheck.org piece is trying to do.
So it starts with the basics.
Okay.
A plane and a helicopter collided.
Right.
Huge loss of life.
Mm-hmm.
The National Transportation Safety Board or NTSB is investigating, but there are no answers yet.
Right.
And then it gets into what then President Trump was saying.
Oh.
And that's where things get interesting.
Interesting how.
Well, his take was that diversity hiring programs within the FAA were to blame.
Really?
Yeah. And he even cited a memo he signed like 8 days before the crash.
Wow.
Called it Keeping Americans Safe in Aviation.
Mm.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, okay.
This memo that he's citing basically twists this long-standing FAA policy
Okay.
to make it sound like it was something brand new from the Biden administration.
Oh, so like...
But this policy has been around since at least 2013. I mean, that means it was around during Obama's time
Right.
and Trump's first term
Mm-hmm.
and Biden's time, too.
I mean, that's a textbook example of how information can be used
Right.
to shape what the public thinks.
Absolutely.
Or maybe misinformation even.
Yeah, and then Trump even brings up this news headline from a whole year earlier.
Really?
Yeah, about a totally unrelated incident.
What was he trying to do with that?
I don't know, but it almost feels like he was trying to make his point stronger.
Interesting.
But the thing is, it wasn't just Trump playing the blame game.
Oh, so both sides were doing it.
The factcheck.org article points out how his critics immediately linked the crash to his executive order,
Oh, yeah.
the one that froze federal hiring.
Yeah,
When
right.
he came back into office.
Yeah,
Do you remember that one?
I do.
Classic case of correlation not equaling causation.
Oh, totally.
Just because two things happen close to each other in time
Right.
doesn't mean one caused the other.
But it's a trap we often fall into,
Oh, we do.
don't we?
Yeah,
We want simple explanations. Yeah. Especially when something terrible happens.
totally.
Yeah.
But the article goes on to explain that hiring freeze
Okay.
actually had exemptions for jobs related to public safety,
Okay.
including air traffic controllers.
Huh.
However,
Oh, there's always a however.
always a however, right?
Yeah.
The article also brings up this New York Times report
Mm-hmm.
that mentioned understaffing problems at Reagan National's air traffic control tower.
Oh, wow.
And apparently, this wasn't a new problem.
Really?
It had been going on for years before Trump even came back into office.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've got a hiring freeze that specifically said air traffic controllers were exempt.
Right.
But we also have these reports saying the tower was understaffed the night of the crash.
Yeah.
And that this understaffing problem had been around for a long time.
Wow.
Talk about conflicting information.
I know. It's like,
It really makes you wonder what was actually going on,
yeah, it makes you wonder if blaming Trump's actions is really accurate.
right? Or any one specific event.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like jumping the gun,
Yeah.
especially this early in the investigation.
Way too early.
Totally agree. The NTSB is going to be looking at everything.
Right.
But then the article brings up another wrinkle,
Another wrinkle. What's that?
how Trump removed or replaced some key people in aviation security.
Mm.
But again, is there a clear, direct line between that and this specific crash?
I mean, we just don't know yet.
We don't.
It really shows how we can't just grab on to the first explanation we hear,
Right.
especially with something as complex as aviation safety.
So much finger pointing, so many accusations,
Yeah.
but no real answers just yet.
What's striking you the most about all of this?
Well,
Oh, so far.
yeah, so far, I think it's how both sides, just in their rush to find fault,
Right.
are missing the bigger picture.
Mm.
A plane crash is rarely caused by one single thing.
Right. It's usually a whole chain of events.
Exactly, multiple factors
Yeah.
that come together to lead to a tragedy like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like everyone wants that simple answer,
Okay.
like a villain to point to.
Right.
But reality is rarely that neat.
Right. Especially with something as complex as a plane crash.
Exactly. And speaking of stories,
Right.
the factcheck.org article goes deeper into some of the specific claims made by Trump,
Yeah.
especially what he said at that press conference the
Okay.
day after the crash.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It was all over the news.
It was.
Well, the article points out how Trump kept using this phrase, diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring,
Okay.
even suggesting that it penalizes hardworking Americans
Wow.
who don't have, a requisite disability or skin color.
So he was implying that qualified people were being passed over
Yeah.
just to fill diversity quotas.
Kind of, yeah, it plays into that common criticism
Yeah.
of affirmative action policies,
Yeah.
which are designed to give more opportunities to
Mhm.
groups that have been historically excluded or disadvantaged.
But isn't the FAA's initiative more about having a workforce that reflects the diversity of the country?
Right.
Not about imposing quotas.
Well, yeah, that's the nuance.
Okay.
It seems to be getting lost in all the finger pointing.
Yeah.
The article actually quotes the FAA's website.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which emphasizes how diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel.
So they're saying that having a variety of viewpoints and experiences is crucial
Yeah.
when you're dealing with something as complex as aviation.
Right.
That makes sense.
It does.
Right, if everyone comes from the same background,
Yeah.
they're all going to have the same blind spots.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this emphasis on diversity and inclusion
Yeah.
isn't unique to the FAA.
Right.
A lot of organizations, both in government and the private sector,
Uh-huh.
recognize the benefits of having a workforce
Mm-hmm.
that mirrors the diversity of the people they serve.
You know what? I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially in a field like aviation,
Right.
where safety is literally a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want the best minds from all different backgrounds
Mm-hmm.
working together to make sure everything is as safe as possible?
Absolutely. Diversity of thought, experience, and background
Right.
can only make it more likely that potential safety concerns will be identified and addressed. The more perspectives you have at the table, the better.
Okay, so we've talked about Trump's take,
Right.
but what about his critics? What
Mhm.
would they say?
Well, the factcheck.org article addresses that too.
Okay.
And it again highlights how important it is to be cautious
Okay.
about drawing those direct lines between events.
Like we said, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. While the article acknowledges that the New York Times did report understaffing issues
Uh-huh.
at the Reagan National Air Traffic Control Tower,
Okay.
it also cites a different report,
Oh.
this one from an Associated Press source. That said, staffing was normal on the night of the crash.
So even when it comes to something as basic as staffing levels,
Yeah,
we're getting conflicting information.
we are. And maybe report itself stated that understaffing at the Reagan Airport Tower has been a chronic problem
Really?
for years, way before Trump's recent hiring freeze.
So it sounds like this might be more of a systemic issue within the FAA,
Yeah.
not the direct result of any one specific action taken by either Trump or Biden.
That's a very plausible interpretation.
Yeah.
The article raises the possibility that staffing levels played a role,
Okay.
but it makes it clear that blaming it solely on Trump's recent actions
Right.
is premature and lacks evidence.
So both sides were quick to point fingers,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is probably much more nuanced than either of their narratives suggest.
That's a very astute observation, and that's why it's so important to be skeptical of any
Yeah.
explanation that claims to be the absolute truth, especially before a thorough investigation has even been conducted.
It's a good reminder to always consider multiple perspectives.
Yes.
Look for evidence and be wary of anyone who says they have all the answers
Yeah.
before all the facts are in.
And I think it also highlights the need to separate fact from opinion.
Yeah.
Emotions run high after a tragedy,
Oh, they do?
but it's crucial to base our understanding on verified information rather
Yeah.
than speculation or conjecture.
Mm.
Otherwise, we're just adding to the noise.
You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah,
It's easy to get swept up in the emotion of the moment,
right.
but we have to be careful not to spread misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to something as serious as this.
Speaking of misinformation,
Okay.
the article also touches on how Trump used a year-old news headline
Oh, really?
to seemingly support his point about diversity hiring practices.
What?
It's a classic tactic, taking something out of context
Okay.
to create a misleading impression.
Wow, that's pretty sneaky.
It is, and it just shows how easily we can be manipulated
Yeah.
if we're not careful.
We really do need to be critical thinkers,
Yes.
not just passive consumers of information.
Exactly. That means questioning what we hear,
Right.
looking for evidence,
Yeah.
and being willing to change our minds when presented with new information.
Absolutely. So going back to the FAA,
Okay.
the article mentions a 2019 program
Mhm.
specifically designed to help people with disabilities train for careers in air traffic control.
Yes, and this program further reinforces the idea
Okay.
that the FAA has been actively working to expand the pool of qualified candidates,
Right.
not lowering standards, as Trump implied.
It sounds like they've been trying to diversify the workforce for quite some time.
Yeah.
Not just as a recent political move.
Exactly, and this isn't about giving anyone a free pass.
Right.
It's about recognizing that talent and potential come from all walks of life,
Mm-hmm.
and that we need to make sure everyone has a fair shot
Yeah.
at contributing their skills.
Okay, so we've got a lot of different threads here.
We do.
We've got Trump blaming diversity hiring practices, his critics blaming the hiring freeze,
Yeah.
and conflicting information about staffing levels.
Right.
What do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to understand about all of this?
Well, I think the key takeaway is the danger of jumping to conclusions.
Okay.
The NTSB investigation will likely take months, if not years,
Right.
to determine the cause of this crash.
Yeah.
Attributing it to any one specific action or person at this stage
Right.
is simply speculation.
Yeah, it feels like everyone wants to find that one smoking gun,
Well, right.
that single point of failure.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not even the right way to think about it.
I think you've hit on something really important.
Okay.
It's this tendency we have to oversimplify these
Okay.
really complex situations. It's
Yeah.
actually a common cognitive bias.
Really?
Yeah, our brains just love simple narratives.
Okay.
A clear cause and effect. It's just easier to process
Right.
than a whole bunch of contributing factors.
So instead of asking who's to blame,
Right.
maybe we should be asking,
Yeah.
what systemic factors might have contributed to this crash?
Exactly.
And what can we learn from this to prevent something like this from happening again?
That's a much more productive line of inquiry.
Right.
It is.
It shifts the focus from pointing fingers to understanding the problem.
Yeah, and the factcheck.org article does touch on some of these bigger issues.
Okay, like what?
Well, it mentions how Trump's decision to remove or replace some key people
Uh-huh.
in aviation security
Right.
could be a factor.
Okay.
But again, it doesn't offer like a definitive link
Right.
to the crash.
It makes you think about the importance of continuity
Yeah,
and experience in those positions related to safety and security.
exactly. You want people in those roles who've seen a lot
Yeah.
and know how to handle different situations.
Right.
And it raises questions
What kind of questions?
about the potential impact of political appointments on the functioning of these critical agencies like the FAA.
Right.
Are we always putting the most qualified people in these roles,
That's a good point.
or are there other factors at play?
Yeah. We need to make sure that these agencies are led by people
Right.
who prioritize safety above all else,
Yeah.
regardless of their political affiliations.
It's about finding that balance
Okay.
between accountability and expertise.
Yeah.
Elected officials have the right to appoint leaders who align with their policies.
Mm-hmm.
But those appointees need to have the knowledge and experience
Yeah.
to effectively oversee these complex systems.
It's not just about ideology.
Right.
It's about competence.
Exactly.
And maybe that's part of the bigger lesson here.
Okay.
Aviation safety is this incredibly complex web
It is.
of interconnected systems,
Yeah.
from the technology and infrastructure
Mhm.
to the training and human factors.
Absolutely.
It's not just about blaming individuals.
Right.
It's about understanding how all these pieces fit together
Yeah.
and making sure the system as a whole is strong
Mm-hmm.
and resilient.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Thanks.
This tragic crash is a reminder that safety is an ongoing process.
Okay.
It's a continuous cycle of evaluation, improvement, and adaptation.
So what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
That's a good question.
was the most important message from this deep dive?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is to be critical consumers of information.
Okay.
Don't just accept any single narrative at face value,
Right.
especially in the immediate aftermath of a major event.
Yeah, emotions are high.
Exactly.
Everyone's looking for answer.
Look for evidence.
Right.
Consider multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers before a proper investigation has even been completed.
That's great advice. And remember, this deep dive was just a starting point.
It was.
As more information comes out from the NTSB investigation.
Right.
Keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Stay informed and use your critical thinking skills to separate fact from fiction.
It's so important.
Because the truth, as they say, is often more complicated than it first appears.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
I agree. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.